Aloha. Welcome to Light Drama Action. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. And let's get to the content for today. Peace.
Before we begin, I want to offer a clear and firm warning. What you're about to hear contains graphic descriptions. This content is intended for mature audiences only. Listener discretion is strongly advised. And remember, all individuals mentioned in this video, including Mr. Combs, are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. If you're joining us for the first time, full summaries for days 1 through 20 are available on the video tab of this channel. Day 21, witnesses on the stand, a girlfriend's harrowing testimony. On day 21 of Sean Diddy Combs' federal trial, the courtroom's attention centered on a single pivotal witness, Combs' former girlfriend testifying under the alias Jane. Jane, a social media influencer and model in her early 30s, was the third alleged victim to take the stand following testimony by R&B singer Cassie Ventura and a former personal assistant known as Mia. Despite her glamorous background, Jane cut a subdued figure in court. She spoke barely above a whisper, forcing jurors to lean forward to catch her words. Throughout her testimony, she avoided looking at Combs, keeping her teary eyes fixed on Assistant U.S. Attorney Maureen Comey, the prosecutor questioning her. Combs, seated at the defense table in a navy suit, stared intently at Jane, though she never met his gaze. Jane's role in Combs' orbit was not that of an employee or protege, but as a romantic partner entangled in his darkest secrets. She dated Combs from 2021 until just before his arrest in late 2024. Within that period, as the jury would learn, she experienced a cycle of lavish affection and brutal exploitation. Prosecutors allege Combs used his wealth and power to lure Jane into a deviant world of hotel nights, his term for marathon sex parties with hired men, and to coerce her silence through fear and financial dependence. Jane's appearance belied the turbulence of her story. Dressed in a conservative black blouse and skirt, she maintained a poised posture even as her voice trembled. Her curly dark hair was pulled back neatly, revealing a face that flushed with emotion when she spoke. At times, her composure cracked, especially under cross-examination, and she would swallow hard or dab at the corner of her eyes. But when challenged, she also showed flashes of resolve and even sarcasm, suggesting inner strength honed over years of surviving Combs' domination. Joining her in court, though not on the stand, were figures from Combs' entourage. The defense bench was flanked by Combs' high-powered lawyers. In the gallery sat Combs' mother, Janice, and two of his sons, Christian and Justin, offering silent support. After 5 weeks of testimony, Judge Aaron Subramanian presided with a firm hand, keenly aware of the trial's stakes. A court artist's pencil scratched furiously, capturing each witness's expression. Jane's downcast eyes, Combs' stiff posture for the world outside. As proceedings commenced, Judge Subramanian addressed an unexpected issue that morning, a potential problem with a juror. Specifically, juror number 6 had come under scrutiny, casting a brief shadow over the day's witness testimony. A juror under scrutiny, conflict over juror number 6. Before Jane resumed her testimony, courtroom focus shifted to juror number 6, whose impartiality had been called into question. In a hushed sidebar outside the jury's presence, Judge Subramanian revealed that prosecutors had requested this juror's removal for showing a lack of candor. The exact concern was sealed. The judge only noted that something about the juror's background or answers hadn't added up. Lead prosecutor Maureen Comey told the judge it appeared the juror had not been fully honest with the court, a development the government found serious enough to raise mid-trial. "We did not want to do this. We were compelled," Comey said of the motion to dismiss the juror. On the other side, Combs' defense team vehemently opposed removing juror number 6. Defense attorney Alexandra Shapiro argued that the prosecution's concern was a pretext, a thinly veiled effort to dismiss a black juror. She contended pointedly. The implication hung in the air. Given the high-profile defendant's race, any attempt to oust a black juror could raise suspicions of bias or jury engineering. Shapiro all but accused the government of trying to swap out a juror they perceived as sympathetic to Combs due to shared background. The exchange put Judge Subramanian in a delicate spot. balancing the need for an unbiased jury with the charged issue of racial optics. He listened impassively as each side made its case. Ultimately, the judge declined to rule immediately. He noted that attorneys from both sides had submitted sealed letters on the issue and that he would give the matter further thought. "I'll address Juror 6 first thing tomorrow," Judge Subramanian announced, effectively tabling the controversy for now. This brief saga injected palpable tension into the courtroom. Jane, waiting in the wings to continue her testimony, sat quietly as lawyers sparred over the juror. It was a stark reminder that the trial's drama wasn't confined to witness testimony. Even the composition of the jury itself had become a battlefield. As one legal analyst later noted, mid-trial juror disputes are uncommon and can signal seismic ripples beneath an already high-stakes case. Both sides understood that a single juror's leanings could tip the scales toward conviction or acquittal. With Judge Subramanian postponing resolution, an uneasy truce prevailed. Juror number 6 remained for now, his fate to be decided another day. The defense cross-examination in attack mode. When Teny Geragos rose from the defense table to begin her cross-examination of Jane, an air of confrontation crackled in the room. Her mission: undermine Jane's credibility and recast her not as an innocent victim of a predatory scheme. In a measured, cool tone, Geragos methodically walked Jane through aspects of her relationship with Combs that might suggest complicity or ulterior motives. First, Geragos zeroed in on the financial benefits Jane received under gentle but persistent prodding. Jane conceded that Combs had been exceedingly generous to her. "Mr. Combs' largesse helped you nearly quadruple the size of your home, correct?" Geragos asked, referring to the upscale Los Angeles house where Jane lived during their relationship. Jane acknowledged that after she began dating Combs, she went from a 1,400 square foot apartment to a 5,300 square foot home. Geragos pressed the point. "You were able to give your child a large backyard and a big home," she noted, implicitly crediting Combs' money for Jane's improved lifestyle. Jane, visibly uncomfortable, agreed that was true. It was an early thrust by the defense to paint Jane as someone who clings to powerful men for status and support. In fact, moments earlier, Jane had admitted, "My ideal partner is a protector and provider," saying she does find successful, wealthy men attractive. Geragos let that line hang in the air as if to suggest Jane had sought exactly what she got from Combs, and perhaps was now twisting the narrative out of regret or greed. Next, Geragos turned to material gifts and jealousy. In a line of questioning that would generate some of the day's most memorable courtroom drama, the defense attorney probed Jane's feelings about Combs' other women and the luxuries they received. Jurors learned that while dating Jane, Combs was also openly involved with another girlfriend, a model named Gina, and perhaps others. One incident in March 2022 especially gnawed at her. Gina flaunted a new Chanel handbag on social media, a bag that matched a custom Chanel bracelet Combs had given Jane. Jane testified that seeing the post left her hurt and insecure. She even asked Combs to make Gina delete it. On the stand, Jane blushed slightly as she confessed this. Geragos seized on it. With a faint smirk, she posed a provocative question. "You didn't get a Chanel bag, did you?" The insinuation was clear. Jane was jealous and resentful over not getting the same lavish gifts. There was a beat of silence. Then Jane shot back with a jolt of emotion and sarcasm that electrified the courtroom. "I only got trauma." Her retort landed like a slap. A few jurors' eyes widened. One of Combs' lawyers shifted in his seat. Even Geragos momentarily raised an eyebrow, taken aback by the sting in Jane's reply. The quote, "I only got trauma," succinctly encapsulated Jane's claim that whatever glittering things Combs gave her paled next to the psychological scars she bore. Geragos recovered quickly and continued in this vein. She asked about a designer Bottega handbag that Jane had mentioned earlier in her testimony. "What is a Bottega bag?" Geragos inquired innocently. Jane narrowed her eyes and quipped, "I'm sure you have one." A ripple of laughter passed through some spectators. The tension between witness and lawyer was palpable. But Jane's response turned the implication on its head. Leaning into the microphone, she issued a blistering rejoinder. How much does my body cost? The air in the courtroom practically crackled. It was as if Jane were reclaiming the narrative. Yes, Combs lavished her with pricey accessories, but only in exchange for her body and soul. Her rhetorical question hung over the proceedings, a challenge to anyone who dared reduce her ordeal to dollar signs. This tense back and forth over handbags and trauma was a microcosm of the defense strategy. Geragos aimed to show that Jane's resentment stemmed from personal slights, envy of other girlfriends, desire for more gifts, rather than from being forced into anything non-consensual. If Jane could be portrayed as a jilted lover, her allegations of coercion might look more like retroactive bitterness. Jane, however, parried each insinuation with a mix of indignation and pain, underscoring that what she truly got from the relationship was far from a fairy tale. The courtroom was riveted by this duel. Even Judge Subramanian, who typically maintained a poker face, watched the exchange with a keen gaze. At one point, the judge gently reminded both sides to keep their voices measured. Jane's retorts had grown louder, her facade of calm starting to crack. She wasn't just answering questions, she was testifying to her truth with raw edges fully exposed. Through it all, Combs sat upright at the defense table, expression mostly inscrutable, but observant attendees noticed his jaw tighten during Jane's cutting remarks. He occasionally leaned over to whisper to Unveiled or Geragos, perhaps strategizing midstream. Courtroom observers later likened the combative cross to a Perry Mason moment in real time. In fact, just days earlier, Judge Subramanian himself had complimented the defense's grilling of another witness as a real Perry Mason moment. Geragos seemed determined to deliver a repeat performance with Jane. She maintained a prosecutorial tone, spotlighting any contradiction or inconsistency in Jane's story. For instance, Geragos introduced evidence of an audio recording tied to what Jane had termed their love contract, in which Combs promised to financially support Jane, essentially an arrangement to pay for her living expenses in exchange for her continued participation in his multi-partner sexual escapades. Jane had described signing this pact with trepidation, saying it soon became a coercive tool that bound her to Combs' demands. But now, the defense played snippets from an audio message around the time of that contract. "You are the crackpipe. That's my new name for you, crackpipe. Or should I call you CP?" The courtroom murmur at that quote was audible. The metaphor was jarring. Combs likened Jane to a drug he couldn't quit, a pet object of his addiction. Geragos paused the audio and looked to Jane. "Wasn't this in fact Combs expressing love, even dependence were on you?" she asked in substance. Yes, she entered the arrangement, Jane admitted, because it made Combs so happy and she hoped it would strengthen their bond. It was a fraught admission. Geragos let that point sink in with the jury, but Jane quickly added context. "I felt I needed to use graphic language to keep Sean Combs happy," she clarified, referring to her enthusiastic sexting and participation in those days. "I was agreeable here," she said of the contract, "because I was really, in 2021, so deeply in love. I would do anything for him." The defense attorney nodded almost sympathetically, then pounced. If Jane was willingly engaging and even initiating lurid encounters out of love, where was the coercion? Where was the force? This became a central point of contention that day. Reading between the lines, love and rage in black and white, perhaps the most dramatic moments of day 21 came when Jane's own text messages were put under the microscope, carefully angled so only jurors could see per the judge's orders. Through these messages, the emotional whiplash of Jane's relationship with Combs came into stark relief, swinging from declarations of adoration to eruptions of anger and despair. Early in the afternoon, Assistant U.S. Attorney Comey, on redirect examination, asked Jane to read aloud a heartfelt message she had sent to Combs in mid-2023, shortly after the couple had taken a luxurious trip to Turks. This was presumably a high point in their romance, a sun-soaked getaway to a private villa. In prior testimony, Jane had claimed she would not have gone on the Turks and Caicos trip had she known an escort named Paul would also be there. As it turned out, Combs had indeed flown in a male sex worker to join them, catching Jane off guard. But the message she wrote during that trip told a different story, one that the defense was eager to highlight. Sitting upright, her hands visibly shaking, Jane began reading the text she'd sent Combs on that vacation. "You are truly a blessing in my life. I have never had a man take care of me like you," she had written. Her voice quavered, thick with emotion. "I feel blessed to have you in my life, and I only wish to be a blessing in yours." The message continued. As these loving words left Jane's lips in court, tears pooled in her eyes. Halfway through, her voice cracked completely. Jane pressed a tissue to her face and broke down, sobbing, unable to go on. The judge signaled for a brief pause. It was an emotionally raw scene. The witness crying over her own past expressions of love, perhaps overwhelmed by the memory of happier moments, or by the painful contrast between those sentiments and the trauma she later experienced. A juror in the front row visibly swallowed hard, while another fiddled with a pen, avoiding eye contact with the weeping witness. After Jane composed herself and court resumed, the defense took the opportunity to put more of her upbeat messages on display. One was a breezy text exchange from August 2023, a time when Jane and Combs were spending ordinary days together without third parties involved. Movie night was off the chain. Combs had texted her after an evening where the two apparently stayed and watching films. Jane had replied flirtatiously, "Loving that. Delicious." The phrasing drew faint smiles. It was a glimpse of normalcy, even sweetness between them. To jurors, it was perhaps jarring to juxtapose this lighthearted banter with Jane's testimony of exploitation. That dissonance was exactly what the defense wanted to emphasize, but the pendulum soon swung the other way. The tone of the messages shifted as evidence moved into the latter part of 2023, when Jane's relationship with Combs was rapidly deteriorating. In one explosive message, Jane's anger burned through every word. It was sent after Combs, while traveling with another woman, had brazenly asked Jane to send him explicit videos of herself with another man. Incensed, Jane wrote back, "It's clear to me you just want me there for a hotel binge. You got plenty of hoes for that." The blunt use of hoes, slang for promiscuous women or prostitutes, and hotel binge made her fury clear. She felt reduced to just another object in Combs' stable. Coming to the realization of what this really is, her message seethed. In court, Jane confirmed she sent that text at a moment of bitter clarity, realizing that, in her view, the only reason he had me around was for these hotel nights. It was a heartbreaking admission of how devalued she felt. Yet, not long after that outburst, Jane's tone softened drastically, and the defense made sure the jury saw this too. A follow-up text from Jane showed her almost apologizing. "I see where I overreacted. We'll be good when we're together," she wrote to Combs shortly after the fiery hose message. This was a telling pattern in their relationship. Jane would reach a breaking point and lash out, only to second-guess herself and attempt to smooth things over. On the stand, Jane explained that cycle. She testified that whenever she tried to set boundaries or express hurt, Combs would either ignore her or respond dismissively, often with a curt phrase like, "Girl, stop." In the face of his minimization, Jane often caved and tried to make peace. The September texts captured that dynamic in real time. Geragos highlighted these mixed signals to the jurors. Look, the defense implied even when she was upset, Jane quickly backpedaled and stayed in the relationship. Was that the behavior of someone truly coerced, or just a tumultuous romance? Through Jane's testimony and text, a portrait emerged of a woman trapped in a psychological vice, bound by love, fear, shame, and financial strings. These messages provided powerful corroboration of her inner turmoil. For the prosecution, Jane's texts were a goldmine. Geragos used the loving text to cast doubt on Jane's victimhood, but the angry and despairing text just as readily bolstered Jane's account of abuse. The truth, it seemed, lived in the jagged space between those extremes. Mid-afternoon, the trial pivoted to one of the most disturbing episodes Jane described, an incident grimly nicknamed the sobriety party. This was Combs's twisted idea of a celebration, one last drug-fueled orgy to mark the end of his drug use. Jane testified that in late 2023, Combs pledged to get clean from narcotics, but perversely insisted on having one wilder hotel night first, dubbing it a sobriety party. The setting was a luxury hotel in Beverly Hills. According to Jane, she had hoped this meant Combs truly wanted to turn a corner and to leave drugs and debauchery behind. Instead, the night became one of the most traumatic ordeals of her life. On the stand, Jane's face went pale as she recounted the evening in question. She remembered swallowing her dread as Combs handed her a pill of ecstasy. By then, she had grown accustomed to using drugs to endure the marathon sex sessions. But this time, desperate to see Combs sober, "I abstained," Jane said. She secretly spat the pill out and stayed clean that night. Combs, however, did not. He downed both ecstasy and cocaine, achieving the euphoric manic state he seemed to crave. With frightening energy, he orchestrated a parade of male sex workers into their hotel suite. Jane was instructed to have sex with them one after another while Combs watched intently. She endured 2 back-to-back encounters before her body rebelled. Overwhelmed by a cocktail of disgust and stress, Jane ran to the bathroom and vomited violently. She told the court she had hoped this might stop the night's activities. Surely he'd see she was ill and call it off. Instead, Jane testified, Combs followed her to the bathroom, almost annoyed. He rubbed her back as she heaved and then coldly told her, "That's good. You'll feel better now that you've thrown up. So let's go." The insinuation was chilling. Now that you've emptied your stomach, you can continue servicing more men. So Jane did. He wouldn't let it end, she said, voice quivering. She returned to the suite's dimly lit bedroom where a third male escort awaited. Mechanically, she complied with Combs's demand and had sex with this man as well. Inside, she was dying. "I was repulsed," Jane told the jury. "I deeply regretted it. I hated it so much." After the third man, the sobriety party finally concluded. The next morning, sunlight brought no peace, just a haze of shame and exhaustion. Jane testified that she curled up alone, sobbing uncontrollably as Combs fell into a drug slumber. She cried on the stand, describing her mindset that night. Instead, her attempt to please him without drugs had been rewarded with cruelty. So this testimony cast a somber pall over the courtroom. A few jurors looked down at their laps. One placed a hand over her mouth, perhaps in shock at the vividness of Jane's account. Judge Subramanian's brow furrowed. Even Combs, usually impassive, appeared momentarily uncomfortable. He shifted in his chair, fingers drumming lightly on his leg as Jane described the Beverly Hills incident. Sensing the heavy impact of this story, the defense moved to counter it with a very different kind of evidence, video footage from around that same time, footage that showed Combs and Jane in a seemingly affectionate moment. Geragos argued that this short cell phone video was crucial context for the jury. With some reluctance, Judge Subramanian allowed it to be played. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the clip began to play on the monitors. In the video, evidently recorded by Jane on her phone in late 2023, the camera shakily focuses on Combs' face. He's shirtless and smiling gently. Off camera, Jane's voice is quiet, audibly sniffly as if she had been crying. Combs leans in and makes a playful kissing sound toward the camera. "We got in a little funk," he says softly, "but we have to make sure we just listen to each other." His tone is soothing, almost tender. In the footage, Jane then lets out a faint laugh, a melancholy chuckle more than a gleeful one, and the video ends with Combs planting an affectionate kiss on her forehead. There is no explicit mention of the sobriety party in the video, but the implication is that it was filmed shortly after one of their big fights or traumatic nights, perhaps as a reconciliation gesture. Watching this scene unfold on screen, the jury saw a completely different side of the aftermath. Rather than a shattered woman and an uncaring man, the video presented a snapshot of a couple apparently working through an argument with tenderness. Combs looked concerned and caring. Jane appeared comforted. The defense later suggested this might have been immediately after the Beverly Hills sobriety ordeal. evidence, they argued that Jane was not visibly traumatized, but rather laughing and cuddling with Combs afterwards. Prosecutors did not confirm the timing of the video, but Jane said it was during a period when she felt depressed about their relationship, which would match late 2023. The jurors' faces were inscrutable as the lights came back up, but the contrast was not lost on anyone. Was Jane masking her pain in the video to appease Combs? Or was the truth that these extreme hotel nights didn't bother her as much as she now claims? These questions lingered in the silent moments after the clip. On redirect, Prosecutor Comey attempted to contextualize the footage. She asked Jane softly, "In that video, were you happy?" Jane responded that she was trying to reassure him and calm things down, not processing her own hurt. "It looks like I'm okay, but I wasn't," she insisted, explaining that she often pretended to be fine for Combs' sake, even when she was internally distraught. The outward appearance versus inward reality, a theme of the trial, was crystallized in that moment. To drive that point home, Comey elicited from Jane that she had begun seeing a trauma therapist a few months after Combs' arrest and had been diagnosed with symptoms of PTSD. Jane testified that only in therapy did she fully permit herself to acknowledge the depth of the abuse she suffered. As the afternoon wore on, testimony turned to an episode that encapsulated the bitter contradictions in Jane's life with Combs. Jane recounted how, as her birthday approached, she yearned for a normal romantic evening out with her boyfriend. By then, her relationship with Combs had been consumed by secretive hotel room marathons, and she desperately wanted a taste of the ordinary, a nice dinner, perhaps dancing, something Instagram-able she could cherish. On the morning of her birthday, she hinted to Combs via text, "Is Nobu the only option tonight?" This was Jane's polite, coded way of asking if they could go somewhere besides the Nobu Hotel, where Combs often stayed in Miami Beach. Maybe the Nobu restaurant or another venue outside the confines of a suite. "I was praying he would read in between those lines," Jane testified, "in hopes he would take me out of the hotel." Combs seemed to take note. He responded by having her put up at the Nobu Hotel, but promised they'd go out for dinner. Evening came, and with it, disappointment. Instead of sweeping her off to a glamorous restaurant, Combs insisted they stay in. Jane recalled sitting in a lavish Nobu Hotel suite, dressed for a night on the town that would never happen. She realized that once again, Combs intended to keep her behind closed doors, and worse, he had invited male escorts as a present for her. As a kind of consolation prize, Combs did give Jane a luxurious gift, a delicate Van Cleef and Arpels necklace studded with diamonds. She forced a grateful smile as he clasped it around her neck, but inside her heart sank. She knew what was coming. That night, Jane testified, Combs made her have sex with 3 different escorts in succession, one after the other, as his birthday treat for her. It was effectively the same sobriety party scenario repeated, except this time under the perverse pretense of a celebration for Jane. There was no birthday cake, no outing to the high-end restaurant she had coyly suggested, Poppy Steak and Carbone, which she texted him about in hopes of a real date. Instead, her party was a parade of strangers in a hotel room, all while Combs watched like a director overseeing a pornographic film. Under cross-examination, Geragos probed this incident in detail, sensing an opportunity to expose what she saw as hypocrisy. The defense attorney confirmed that Combs did give Jane the expensive Van Cleef necklace, emphasizing his generosity. She then confronted Jane with a text message Jane sent right after the birthday ordeal as she was heading home the next day. Despite everything, Jane had texted Combs, "Just wanted to say I loved and appreciated every detail you put together for my birthday." The jurors saw the words in black and white. It sounded like a glowing thank you note. Geragos read it aloud with a hint of incredulity. "You tell him you loved and appreciated every detail, right?" she pressed. On the stand, Jane sighed heavily. One could sense her frustration at her past self for sending that text. "Every detail in regards to him," she clarified to the court. Jane explained that she meant she appreciated the nice parts, that he spent time with her, that he gave her a gift, not the presence of the escorts. The lawyer suggested that Jane's message sounded unequivocal, that she loved every detail of that night, third-party sex and all. Jane grew exasperated. In a flash of defiance, she responded, "I just wanted to recommend another option so I could be romanced on my birthday." Her voice trembled, not with sadness now, but with anger. It was one of the few times her composure slipped into open resentment on cross. The prosecution would later argue that Jane became adept at survival tactics, appeasing her abuser with thanks and love to avoid further anger or violence. The defense, conversely, argued these messages were smoking gun evidence that Jane actually enjoyed parts of the lifestyle and is now claiming trauma out of regret or financial motive. The truth, as often, could lie somewhere in between. The defense meticulously brought out instances where Jane either exercised free will or could have walked away from Combs to argue that any continued participation in freak-offs was, on some level, consensual. In doing so, Geragos tried to plant seeds of doubt about the prosecution's portrayal of Jane as a helpless victim. For example, Geragos highlighted that on several occasions Jane did refuse Combs's sexual demands, and he respected those refusals. One text exchange from early 2022 was projected in court. Jane had told Combs she didn't want to engage in a particular planned session with a male escort. In response, Combs actually obliged and let it go. Jane even acknowledged that there was a 2-month stretch in 2022 with no hotel nights because she had put her foot down for a while. Geragos emphasized this point. "So when you said no, Mr. Combs stopped, correct?" Jane had to agree that in that instance, yes, he did. The defense implied that this undercuts the idea of total coercion. It showed Combs could and would take no for an answer, meaning these acts weren't always forced. Geragos also drew attention to ways in which Jane actively participated in facilitating the sex parties. Under questioning, Jane admitted that she sometimes took it upon herself to prepare for Combs's fantasies. "Didn't you buy matching shorts for Mr. Combs and the escorts to wear during hotel nights?" Geragos asked. Jane, looking a bit embarrassed, answered yes. She had indeed purchased coordinating Versace boxer shorts for Combs and the male sex workers at one point. She also acknowledged that she procured erectile dysfunction pills like Viagra for those men to ensure they could perform for hours as Combs required. Why would a coerced victim go to such lengths to smoothly run the very encounter she supposedly hated? The defense floated that question implicitly. Jane explained that by taking control of some details, the outfits, the pills, she felt she could lean into Combs's fantasies to keep him happy. In other words, if it was going to happen regardless, she preferred to manage it in a way that might be over faster or less rough. This was her coping mechanism, she said. Still, the image of her carefully shopping for designer shorts to match her boyfriend and a prostitute undermined, at least superficially, the notion that she was 100% unwilling. One particularly striking piece of evidence was a text Jane sent describing a threesome that took place the week before New Year's Day 2022. In that text, Jane had gushed that the encounter with the male prostitute was one for the books. This phrase suggests a memorable, even enjoyable time. Under Geragos' questioning, Jane looked pained and said she only wrote that to please Combs' ego. She testified that she leaned into his fantasies in texts, feigning enthusiasm because that's what he wanted to hear. In reality, she told the jury she was often crying on the inside while performing excitement on the outside. "I was realizing this was becoming the dynamic of what we were," she said of those sex parties, describing a slow horror at seeing her relationship transformed into something dark and sleazy. The prosecution later bolstered this point by noting Jane felt compelled to use graphic language in text to appease him, not because she truly enjoyed it. Yet Geragos had one more card, a confrontation Jane had with Combs when she learned he took yet another woman on a lavish vacation without telling her. The jealousy angle resurfaced in a message Jane vented to Combs. "It's not right how you're treating me. The last thing I'd expect from you is coming at me sideways about a girl you like," she wrote, apparently upset that he had the gall to question her about other men when he himself was seeing someone else. "You completely had your way with me," Jane texted him. "You have me feeling so taken advantage of." This was a powerful admission of feeling exploited, language akin to someone acknowledging abuse, but Geragos used Combs' reply to this message as a pivot. Though Combs' exact words weren't read in court, Geragos summarized them. He was saying if the relationship was as toxic as you say, you were welcome to leave, right? Jane agreed that was basically what Combs messaged back, essentially telling her no one's forcing you to stay. It was a stunning moment. Combs himself, in that text exchange, appeared to reject any responsibility, framing it as if Jane was choosing to remain in a mutually toxic dynamic. For the defense, this was a centerpiece argument. Jane could have left. She wasn't physically imprisoned. She had money provided by Combs, sure, but she had it. She had family, friends. Why didn't she just walk away if things were so awful? Geragos let that question linger. Jane's answer was woven throughout her testimony. She stayed because she loved him, because she felt financially beholden. He paid her rent, which she feared losing, and because he had a psychological hold on her that wore down her will over time. Jane illustrated in simple terms when asked why she didn't just run. "I was scared, and I thought I could help him change," she said quietly at one point. "By the time I realized how deep I was in, I felt like it was too late." The contrast between instances of her apparent agency and her claims of coercion encapsulated the legal crux of the trial. Under federal law, to prove sex trafficking, prosecutors must show Combs entice or force Jane into sexual acts through force, fraud, or coercion, or that she was underage, which she wasn't. In Jane's case, the fraud and coercion prongs were key. Prosecutors argue Combs defrauded Jane by luring her with promises of romance and glamour, fancy dinners, exotic trips, only to renege and push her into depraved hotel nights once she was invested in the relationship. They also argue he coerced her with brutal violence, like the alleged beatings and chokeholds, and by making her financially dependent on him. The defense countered with evidence of her consent and complicity, the gifts she solicited to keep up with other girlfriends, the fact that Combs paid her lawyers and rent even after their breakup, and the reality that she stayed in the relationship for years when she ostensibly could have left. Geragos even suggested at one point that Jane and Combs had engaged in a sort of demi-monde of jet-set swingers, implying that what the prosecution calls trafficking was actually consensual, kinky lifestyle, not a crime, just an unconventional private life. By late afternoon, as Geragos' cross-examination wound down, the courtroom felt like a collective wrung-out sponge. Jane had been on the stand for the better part of 3 days. She looked drained, mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes, but also relieved to have stood through the gauntlet. Judge Subramanian, sensing the fatigue of all involved, signaled for an early adjournment about 30 minutes before the usual 4:30 p.m. close. Geragos noted that she had only a few minutes of cross left, which she would wrap up in the morning. The prosecutor indicated the government might rest this case soon after. They were even considering cutting a few witnesses to streamline things. It was a sign that the trial's climax was nearing.